Somewhere between the rugged coast of Iran and the sun-bleached shores of Oman, the Persian Gulf holds its breath. Somewhere between the rugged coast of Iran and the sun-bleached shores of Oman, the Persian Gulf holds its breath. The water narrows, the land closes in on both sides, and for just 33 kilometers, at its very tightest point, the entire energy supply of the modern world squeezes through a single blue corridor. This is the Strait of Hormuz. You may never have sailed through it. You may never have seen it. But every time you fill a tank with petrol, switch on a light, or heat your home, there is a very good chance the energy that made it possible passed through this exact stretch of water. Let's place it on the map precisely because geography is everything here. The Strait of Hormuz, as Britannica defines it, is the only sea channel linking the oil-rich Persian Gulf in the west with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea to the southeast. Look at the map and you'll see it immediately. The Strait of Hormuz, as Britannica defines it, is the only sea channel linking the oil-rich Persian Gulf in the west with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea to the southeast. Look at the map and you'll see it immediately. To the north, the coastline of Iran, running for hundreds of kilometers along the Gulf. To the south, the Musandam Peninsula, belonging to Oman, and just beside it, the coastline of the United Arab Emirates. The passage itself sits between these two shores, stretching 35 to 60 miles wide, but the navigable shipping lanes are far narrower than that. The strait then opens eastward into the Gulf of Oman, which flows into the Arabian Sea, and from there into the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean, the great connector of the world's trade. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the shipping lanes within the strait run primarily through Omani territorial waters and partially through Iranian territorial waters. But critically, they are governed by international maritime law and the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, known as UNCLOS. Under UNCLOS, all nations, regardless of politics, sanctions, or conflict, hold the right of transit passage through international straits. That legal principle is the reason global shipping has flowed here for centuries. And it is exactly that principle that is now being challenged. Now here's something that surprises most people. The Strait of Hormuz is not just strategically vital because it is narrow. It is vital because it is deep enough for the largest ships ever built by human hands. The Strait of Hormuz is not just strategically vital because it is narrow. It is vital because it is deep enough for the largest ships ever built by human hands. Britannica records that the depth of the strait ranges between 60 to 100 meters, deep enough for very large crude carriers, the supertankers that carry over 1 million barrels of oil in a single voyage. No alternative route in the region offers this combination of navigable depth, geographic position, and direct access to the Persian Gulf's oil terminals. That is not a political fact, it is a geological fact, and it has made Hormuz, quite literally, irreplaceable. Now let the data speak, because nothing communicates the scale of Hormuz quite like the raw numbers. Now let the data speak, because nothing communicates the scale of Hormuz quite like the raw numbers. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EIA, in 2022, an average of 21 million barrels of oil per day passed through the Strait of Hormuz. That is the equivalent of roughly 21% of all global petroleum consumption. 1 in every 5 barrels of oil used anywhere on Earth. Around 1/5 of all global LNG, liquefied natural gas, trade also transited through the strait in 2022. Flows through Hormuz in 2022 and the first half of 2023 made up more than 1/4 of total global seaborne traded oil. In 2025, global flows through the strait were running at approximately 15 million barrels per day of crude plus 5 million barrels per day of oil products. And the ships carrying all of this? Britannica reports that daily traffic through the strait typically ranges from more than 80 ships to more than 130, amounting to over 30,000 tankers per year. Pause and hold that number for a moment. 30,000 tankers every single year, each one carrying enough oil to power cities, fuel fleets, and heat homes across entire continents. Not all ships that pass through Hormuz carry oil, but most of the world's attention, understandably, focuses on those that do. Not all ships that pass through Hormuz carry oil, but most of the world's attention, understandably, focuses on those that do. Here are the categories of vessels that navigate this corridor every day. Very large crude carriers, VLCCs. These are the giants of the sea. Each one carries more than 1 million barrels of crude oil. When people talk about a single Hormuz disruption costing billions, they are talking about vessels like these. LNG carriers, specially engineered ships with massive cryogenic tanks, carrying liquefied natural gas at temperatures of -162 degrees Celsius. Qatar, the world's largest LNG exporter, ships the bulk of its gas through Hormuz to customers in Asia and Europe. Goldman Sachs research estimates that approximately 80 million tons per annum of LNG, representing 19% of global LNG supply, normally flows through this strait. Container ships, carrying manufactured goods, electronics, food, and raw materials between Asia, the Middle East, and the world. These rarely make headlines, but their disruption is felt immediately on supermarket shelves and factory floors. Bulk carriers, transporting coal, grain, metals, and fertilizers. For nations that depend on Gulf-origin food imports, these vessels are as critical as any oil tanker. The honest answer is barely. The EIA is clear on this point. Only 2 countries have operating pipelines that can even partially bypass the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi Arabia operates the East-West crude oil pipeline from the eastern province to the Red Sea port of Yanbu. Its standard capacity is 5 million barrels per day, temporarily expanded to 7 million barrels per day in 2019. The UAE has the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline, linking inland fields to the Fujairah export terminal on the Gulf of Oman, with a capacity of 1.5 million barrels per day. Saudi Arabia operates the East-West crude oil pipeline, which runs from oil fields in the eastern province all the way to the Red Sea port of Yanbu. Its standard capacity is 5 million barrels per day, temporarily expanded to 7 million barrels per day in 2019. The UAE has the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline, linking inland oil fields to the Fujairah export terminal on the Gulf of Oman with a capacity of 1.5 million barrels per day. Together, these 2 pipelines offer at most 8.5 million barrels per day of bypass capacity, against a normal Hormuz flow of 21 million barrels per day. The International Energy Agency, IEA, estimates that approximately 4.2 million barrels per day of oil flows through Hormuz can realistically be redirected using all existing spare pipeline capacity. That means, even in the best-case scenario, roughly 16 to 17 million barrels per day has no alternative route. If Hormuz closes, even partially, that oil simply stops moving. The short answer is almost every major economy on Earth. The short answer is almost every major economy on Earth. China, the world's largest oil importer. The bulk of China's Gulf crude, sourced from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and the UAE, arrives via tankers through Hormuz. A disruption here hits Chinese industry, manufacturing, and fuel supply directly. India, according to Times of India, March 2026, India imports roughly 88% of its crude oil. In February 2026, approximately 53% of India's total crude imports passed through the Strait of Hormuz, and even in a calmer 2025, the figure was around 41%. India's refineries have been operating at full capacity, building emergency reserves, precisely because of how exposed this route makes the country. Japan and South Korea. Both nations are among the most Hormuz-dependent economies in the world. With virtually no domestic oil production, they rely almost entirely on Gulf crude. A prolonged disruption would trigger immediate energy rationing scenarios in both countries. Europe, less dependent on Gulf crude directly, but critically exposed to LNG. Qatar supplies enormous volumes of natural gas to European markets through Hormuz. Goldman Sachs research warns that a full one-month halt of LNG flows through the strait could push European natural gas prices, measured by the Dutch TTF benchmark, towards 74-year MW's. A disruption lasting more than 2 months could push prices above 100-year MW, compared to a pre-conflict level of around 31.6-year MW. The United States, while less directly dependent on Gulf oil than in previous decades, the U.S. remains deeply invested in keeping Hormuz open. This is partly about its own interests, and partly about the energy security of every major ally it has in Asia and Europe. Strategists and geographers have a specific term for places like this: a choke point. Strategists and geographers have a specific term for places like this: a choke point. A choke point is a narrow navigational passage where geography alone creates extraordinary leverage. Block it, threaten it, or simply make ships afraid to use it, and the ripple effects spread instantly to every economy that depends on what flows through it. Britannica captures the core paradox of Hormuz precisely. The depth of the strait makes it difficult for any country, including Iran, to disrupt shipping for a prolonged period of time. Nonetheless, during the 2026 Iran war, the threat of confrontation alone proved enough to divert more than 90% of commercial traffic. That is the defining truth of a choke point. You do not need to close it permanently. You only need to make people afraid to use it, and the economic consequences follow automatically. No mines need to be laid. No ships need to be sunk. The shadow of disruption is enough to reroute fleets, spike insurance premiums, and send oil prices climbing around the world within hours. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest. In a world that spans 40,000 kilometers at the equator, that is almost nothing. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest. In a world that spans 40,000 kilometers at the equator, that is almost nothing. And yet, through that thin blue corridor flows 1/5 of all the oil the world consumes. Through it moves the energy that heats European homes, powers Chinese factories, fuels Indian trucks, and keeps the lights on across Asia. It is not merely a waterway, it is a pressure valve for the global economy. When it flows freely, the world barely notices it exists. When it doesn't, even for a week, even under the shadow of a threat, oil prices surge, supply chains fracture, and governments scramble. Its geography made it important. Human dependence on energy made it irreplaceable. And the politics of the nations that surround it have made it, right now, the most dangerous 33 kilometers on Earth.